Inslee on the other side.
Thank you.
Oops.
We're ready? Good morning. We are so excited to be in the banks of this incredible river that unites two great states for a tremendous project and a tremendous initiative that I'm so pleased to join Governor Brown and other officials to discuss today. This morning we are restarting the effort to replace the Interstate I-5 bridge across the Columbia River. And I could not be more excited about an endeavor that unites the energies of two states. And the reason is that bridges, besides being steel, are essentially monuments to optimism. And our two states are extremely optimistic. We believe in a dynamic, growth-oriented future. We believe that our futures are united inextricably. We believe that this bridge is important to the economies not just of two counties, but two states. This is an absolute arterial for the economies and lives of the entire state of Washington and Oregon. And we know that it is mandatory that we replace this bridge. We do not have an option. This bridge has to be replaced. It has to be replaced for several reasons. Number one, it is seismically at risk. It is something that was placed in the river during the Woodrow Wilson administration, and for safety reasons, we need to replace this bridge. Secondly, the growth of our communities has been spectacular, and we are confident will continue, and that we have to accommodate the increased demands of commuters and travelers across this bridge. It is a traffic bottleneck that is not consistent with the economic growth that we want to see on both sides of the river. And indeed, I was reminded this morning, it is the only stoplight between Mexico and Canada on the I-5 corridor. We can do better, and we have to do that. So we know that there is no option, and now we believe that we have an opportunity to restart the process to design and construct a bridge that is consistent with our values on both sides of the river. On our side of the river, we have already taken action in this regard. We've dedicated $44 million on both sides, that's the total from both states, to reopen our project office so that our office on our side of the river can certainly start in that regard. And we intend this process to be a data-driven, transparent process. We want to look at the data on how to design a bridge that will actually do the best job possible based on data rather than ideology, and we're excited to have that discussion. Now, I want to point out that we have never stopped since the last effort did not reach completion in this regard. In our state, we've secured over $98 million for key infrastructures like the I-5 Mill Plain Boulevard interchange that essentially was part of this project. So we've always been intent to finish this project in the state of Washington. In 2017, we established a baseline of planning information to allow this project to move forward, and we want to keep those options open. We've instructed our departments of transportation to assign dedicated staff to help this program office when it gets started. Program development will begin once an administrator and consultant are in place. So we have been intent on starting and finishing this project for years now, and this is a high priority for me because I really believe in the growth potential of my state, and I believe it is true with Governor Brown. We are separated by a magnificent river, but I believe the values are consistent on both sides of this river, and so I really look forward to the upcoming years of work. So I'm pleased to have Governor Brown here today. She's been a fantastic partner. She's apologized for the Oregon Ducks' last performance, and we look forward to next year in that regard. Governor Brown.
Thank you very much, Governor Inslee, and I'm delighted to see your excitement about this project and football in general. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate your presence. we come together from both sides of the river with a very common goal, and that is to build a resilient bridge that will serve both Oregon and Washington, frankly, for decades to come. Both of our states are currently experiencing unprecedented population, cultural, and economic growth, and that's a good thing. There are many interlocking pieces that have spurred and fostered this growth, for which I'm sure Governor Inslee agrees we are both exhilarated and grateful. And coming out of a recession that hit both of our states very hard, we've learned that we have to focus on preparation. As we look ahead to an eventual downturn, we have to invest in the bedrock of our state's economies, and that's infrastructure. When working properly, infrastructure goes unnoticed, but without it, we're literally in for a bumpy ride. Our states are more interconnected than ever through broadband, watersheds, transportation, economic development, and natural resources. We're tied so closely together that folks from other parts of the country often mistake us for one big state. I'm not sure that's a compliment to our collaboration. It might be a slam on our national geography curriculum. I'll let you all decide. But either way, we are in this together, and I don't believe that Oregon could have picked a better partner. The joint effort to plan and execute a better I-5 bridge is a really critical step forward as we invest in the growth of our region. The first step is going to be to establish an office to examine the work that's been done in previous efforts and what needs to be done to replace the Interstate bridge. The office will investigate what progress we can build from, what federal dollars are available, and report back to both state legislatures with a plan to move forward. It's high time that we address the congestion between our two states and invest in a bridge that will stand the test of time. For the last several years, we've sought to provide all Oregonians with the opportunity to believe in the idea of a brighter tomorrow. And I know that Governor Inslee is doing the same for Washingtonians. The brighter tomorrow includes a earthquake-resilient I-5 bridge crossing, one that's seismically safe, provides the opportunity for high-capacity transit, and with enough space to accommodate our ever-growing populations. And with the building that's going on here in the Couve, you're clearly growing. So it's my great pleasure now to open it up to our transportation experts, Secretary Millar and Director Strickler. Again, thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited for what the future holds. Oh, to my right, not my left.
Thank you, Governor, and it's great to be here this morning. While we're doing the collegiate thing, when I first graduated from the University of Virginia and moved out west, I was an Army brat, so I got to choose where I wanted to live. I lived in Hazeldale, and I commuted to Portland, and the traffic was bad then. That was 1982. The number 5 bus took forever to get downtown. So these things are complex and difficult problems to solve, and I think we've got the partnership to see this through. We have tough decisions ahead of us as partners. The governors through their leadership, the legislature through its leadership here on the Washington side, and my colleague's leadership, his legislature over there on the Oregon side, we're making progress. And what we're doing as a team before we start answering the tough questions about the specifics of the bridge, the specifics of the schedule, the specifics of the financial package, which at this point we do not have answers for, we need to come to agreement on how we're going to reach those decisions together. So our team, and this is Director Strickler's team and my team together, have been working with the governors, with the legislature, with the leadership of the local governments, with the leadership of the tribal governments on a process for arriving at decisions. And we're going to get to consent for that process before we start making decisions like who's the program manager, where's the office located? People are looking for answers to those questions. We want to do this right. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Director Strickler.
Thank you very much. It wouldn't be complete if I didn't also have a college story. So while I live in Portland, Northeast Portland right now, I had the benefit of being in Pullman this last weekend for Dad's weekend, I should say, to watch the Cougs finally beat somebody. And so they beat Stanford, and it was a great game to watch with my son. It was a good time. I want to concur with everything that you've heard today and really be brief in my remarks and simply say that partnership that Secretary Millar has described is probably the most important thing going forward. As we start to move a project like this or a program that really touches the lives of so many people, there's over 138,000 vehicles a day crossing that bridge right now. And that touches people, that touches individuals, that touches the economy, it touches so much of what we do every day. What we do together as government is really important in that partnership as we move forward. The other thing I would say is as we look to the seismic resiliency and the needs that are built into what a replacement bridge looks like or will look like in the future, it's important that we're listening to those voices and carrying those things forward and really providing something that we can all be proud of into the future because the transportation system is evolving around us at a very rapid rate and we need to develop something that can accommodate that future. Those bridges have been out there for more than 100 years, or at least one of them has. We need to build something that will last at least that long, if not longer, into the future.
Okay. So, the governor and I will now be signing our memorandum of intent. I'm excited about signing this document. I think it is a great start of a long road. We have a lot of work to do. I'll just mention two things in the memorandum of intent. It commits our states to reopening a joint Oregon and Washington State Project Office to replace the Interstate 5 bridge across the Columbia River. It establishes some dates that will have an interim report to us by the end of this year and a final report by December 1, 2020. During this process, we're going to have many, many conversations starting today when I'm meeting some local elected officials. We have Representatives Paul Harris, Wiley, and Senator Cleveland here. We have Lynn Peterson here. We appreciate her work north of the river, and we'll have many, many discussions. I will be going to Salem this afternoon, talking to Oregon legislative leaders. The memorandum of intent has a clause I'll just allude to. I think it's an important one. It says that in reevaluating the project scope of this project, the office shall assume that any plan for a new bridge will include high-capacity transit. So those are some of the highlights of our intent. And with that, Governor Brown, would you like to say anything before we sign?
All I want to say is I'm very grateful for both our legislature's collaborative effort in this work and look forward to the conversations in Salem. We're delighted, speaking of college and law school, we're delighted to welcome you back down to the community of Salem, where Governor Inslee attended law school at Willamette Law School. So,
Go Bearcats. Shall we sign?
Let's do it.
We'll do so here. Should we switch?
We'll switch.
Okay, we can do that.
I'm keeping my Oregon pen now.
It's as good as done. How's that?
I'm like, great. I'm like, yay!
Happy to stand for questions. John.
How are you going to pay for this?
We'll start with John here.
I'm going to throw all the money, and I'm doing the same question she is, throw all the money questions at you. The previous version of the bridge had about a $3.5 billion price tag. Will the price tag for this be greater? Will the passage of the Tim Eyman initiative, is that going to put a really big cut into what Washington can raise? And will this be a toll bridge?
Thanks, John. The price tag of this investment, this non-optional investment, let me point this out. There is no option other than making this investment. The price tag I can assure you will be lower than if we wait another year or two to get this job done. This is the right day to start. And the least expensive way to replace this bridge is to start today. I just want to point that out. Other than that, the parameters are unknown because we have to design the bridge. Secondly, the voters' initiative will not affect at least our immediate actions because this is a safety issue. It is a replacement of an existing bridge, and our freeze, if you will, applies to new capacity infrastructure. So we will move forward with the joint office consistent with the money that's been appropriated in that regard. Your third question about tolling, that is unknown, although the memorandum of intent makes reference to not eliminating the possibility of tolling. I think anyone who understands the financial necessities here and also the uncertainty regarding federal funding, because we had certain federal funding on the original project that is now uncertain at best. So we've recognized reality that could be under discussion. And if so, it's going to be something that both Washington and Oregon is going to have agreement on if we move forward, and everyone's going to be listened to, and all options, including getting 100% federal funding, we would love to seek. So we'll be aggressive in that regard. Go ahead.
Look, I think it's critically important that we have all of our partners at the table, and that includes our federal partners. This project is key not just for the economies of Oregon and Washington, but it's key for the economies in the entire Western region. So I think it's critically important that we have our federal partners at the table.
Just one comment, if I may. The Congress, the federal government has been discussing major infrastructure advances for the whole country, and I am hopeful that that will advance sooner rather than later. But it is very difficult to understand how this project would not be in a top echelon for any national infrastructure project. It's very difficult, besides our parochial concerns, understanding we've got the two best states in the nation, to think that anyone else would have a better claim on any infrastructure dollars. So what I would say is, yes, it was very difficult and painful for us when we did not seize the money that was right before us years ago. But if the nation moves forward on an infrastructure package, which I hope it will, I have to believe we've got a great, great argument for federal funding in this regard. But we need a national package, I believe, to make that easier.
I know you both favor light rail on this bridge, but would you put that to a vote or just go ahead with it?
What I think is critically important is that we invest in high-capacity public transit on this project. I think we need the smartest, most efficient, most cost-effective type of transit. I think what else is key is that we're going to be doing a traffic analysis ahead of time to help us determine what's the best solution for the I-5 bridge replacement project.
I don't think there's nothing in the memorandum of intent that has any preconditions about votes or decision-making capacity in this regard. I think it would be unusual if that was the case. If we can find a way to finance this bridge and it meets the needs for high-capacity transit, we want to move forward. So I certainly don't believe that's necessary at the moment.
Okay, following up on the same topic, would you have to create something like Sound Transit to do light rail? And one of the criticisms of light rail in the 2013 package was if you build a bridge high enough for a ship to go over it, there was a lot of criticism at the time that it would have been too steep for light rail. So I want to throw those two light rail.
Well, we think the original project had a satisfactory light rail profile. That was my view of it. I thought we were totally satisfied and confident that that design would have been successful. But I think the nature of this discussion, and I think this is one of the good things, that we're not setting preconditions of type of high capacity systems. And we're going to be driven by data, and there will be a very thorough analysis of the alternatives, and then we'll have a very vigorous discussion in our constituencies to see what their thoughts are. But I think going in this without preconditions is a really good place to be, given the history of this project. And I'm looking forward to those discussions, including in Salem today. Yeah.
The previous effort obviously was about more than just the bridge or light rail. It was about interchanges on both sides of the river. Do you start with the same idea that we're talking about reconfiguring interchanges on both sides, or are you focused strictly on the bridge?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things to consider. Clearly, the previous project work did consider a 5-mile section, a mile of which, or roughly a mile of which, was the bridge itself. I think as we look to go forward, it's imperative in what you're hearing today is that some portion of the bridge needs to move forward just as quickly as we can. And so we have to look at phasing options and anything that we can in that regard so that we can implement a new bridge just as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and
Roger had something.
yeah, I think the other thing to recognize is that the bridge exists in a context, and we need to develop the plan for the bridge in that context, in the context of regional and indeed national freight movement, in the context of commute patterns, in the context of other modes of transportation that are being discussed today. All of that needs to come to that table. So I can't answer that question for you until we get agreement how we're going to be making decisions, like how the structure itself fits into the broader transportation, economic development, quality of life, and environmental context that it's going to have to fit into to be successful in our two communities.
Lauren, go ahead.
How many employees, what their responsibilities will be, just some kind of idea.
Yeah, we don't have a fixed number of employees, just to answer that directly out of the gate. What the $44 million will start to implement is that program administration or that program office, and then build from there as we start to answer the questions that Secretary Millar and both governors have raised. And so you'll see a consultant help, you'll see a project team being put together intending to answer those questions, especially around those high-capacity transit questions and those other elements that you've heard already from this morning.
And assuming, again, that we have federal partners in this, and I believe that it's a very likely scenario, there is a federal process, and we need to engage. We had that federal process to a certain point. One of the things we need to do is, okay, how far back do we go in that process? And then we move forward, and the team is funded to do that work.
Now, let me add something, too, because I wanted to clarify about this issue of federal financing. There is federal financing out there for projects today that has been appropriated, and it is not absolutely necessary to have an entirely new infrastructure project from the United States. The point I earlier made, though, is it would be a heck of a lot easier if we are in that situation. I hope that to be the case. I'll make one other comment, too, following up a couple others. In the discussion of what type of technology to use for this high-capacity corridor, the one thing I think we do understand very deeply on both sides of the river is that any high-capacity corridor has to be dedicated high-capacity corridor. And I think that's a reality that sometimes some folks have not really understood. So we will follow data-driven decisions with that geophysical requirement in mind.
As far as 976 goes, have any projects been postponed, and can you use the rainy day fund?
I won't speak to the rainy day fund because those aren't our decisions. But in terms of postponing work, the governor directed me and my team to develop a list of projects that add capacity to our system and put those projects on hold until the governor can propose a budget and the legislature can consider a budget. The goal being to keep those resources available in the event that anybody wants to make decisions to spend them differently. The reason we're looking at holding on projects that add capacity, when you get into a financial situation like this, the voters have spoken. What I believe, and the governor has told me he shares this belief, we have had conversations about this. First thing you need to do is preserve what you have and keep it safe. You need to operate it as efficiently as possible, and then you look to adding to it. There's a lot of money in our budget that is adding to the system. We can put a pause on that while the governor and the legislature go through their process. That doesn't mean that those projects are dead. It just means they're paused while the conversation goes on.
Critics have said this is punishment to voters who voted at 97-6.
No critics who know what they're talking about say that, because they wouldn't know what they're talking about. This is a reality-based, financially necessary step to give the legislators a reserve, if you will, to figure out how to deal with the impacts of this. We got buses to run, we have ferries to run, we have safety projects, and we can't go dedicating money and spending money on new capacity if you have to be shutting down ferry runs. You have bridges that have safety issues that aren't getting fixed. Those are the highest priorities. So this is a fiscally necessary decision, and it was a right decision. It is not an easy decision because we have constituents all over the state of Washington, I'm sure Oregon, who want to see new capacity in their neighborhoods, who want to see an overpass or an entry so they can get on I-5 easier. They want these projects. They've been waiting for decades sometimes for these projects. We're now going to have to tell them that those are on hold, at least pending some of the resolutions. So this was not an easy decision. But it was fiscally prudent and necessary so that we can deal with safety and other issues. Let me answer your other question about the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund simply cannot solve this problem for a variety of reasons. Number one, they're one-time dollars. Once they're spent, they're gone. These are ongoing projects for decades. And so the rainy day fund, even though it's not insignificant, simply cannot carry the capacity for decades of the projects we need. That's number one. Number two, we have other needs in the state of Washington. We have prisons and hospitals and the like. And number three, it's going to rain. We don't know when it's going to rain.
We hope.
We hope it's going to rain, right? But, you know, at some point, we have to be prepared for a slowdown in the economy. Obviously, that won't happen until these two governors are out of office, but we simply got to be prepared.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Who hasn't asked a
This
question?
young lady back here.
Governor Inslee, you mentioned earlier that you feel like bridges are monuments of optimism. About a month ago, we had a story on the bridge, and someone actually commented saying, "I'm an eternal optimist, except when it comes to this, and the previous committee assigned to the task of replacing the I-5 bridge. I'm afraid they will waste tremendous amounts of money and still not come up with a resolution or a plan. How are you guaranteeing that the $44 million you've both already invested is going to pay off?"
Well, I think this is a new time and a new day in a variety of ways, and I actually am optimistic about getting this project done. I'll just tell you personally, I'm optimistic for several reasons. Number one, there's no other option. This has to be done. I mean, it really does. Number two, there are different people involved in this decision-making in this process. There's been change in the makeup of the Washington State Legislature that I believe it much more likely for us to find a resolution of this, a consensus of this, and that's been a very significant change. Third, I think as the bridge ages, there's just more recognition of the seismic risks associated with this. We have learned more about the Cascadia subduction zone, which is very concerning to me, and I think much more concerning to people than it was 5 or 6 years ago, because we know what we're facing at some point in the future that does not allow us to say this bridge is, you know, really as safe as it should be given that seismic risk. So I really am I am optimistic about this, and I hope people will share that this is a worthwhile investment. It is a necessary one.
I'm going to also add on to that from Oregon's perspective. I really saw the ball, with all due respect, in Governor Inslee's court. They have certainly come to the table with significant resources, significant skin in the game. I have a serious commitment from my partner in Washington. As he mentioned, they have new legislative leadership. And I think it's really key, as he mentioned, regarding the seismic resilience issue, and that Oregonians and Washingtonians have a better understanding of how critical it is that we make this investment for a seismic resilient bridge. So, thanks.
The inclusion of light rail was one element of the previous project that people in Clark County had some problems with. The other was the fact that the proposed bridge, by a lot of analysis, would not have really improved commute times for existing commuters there's already been some discussion in the two bi-state bridge committee meetings about what should the priorities for this project be. So let me ask you both to say what you feel like the most important element of this. Is it decreasing commute times? Is it adding a mass transit option, or is it safety? Or is it a combination?
There's no question for me that our absolute number one priority has to be seismic resilience for this particular project. Secondly, for me, it would include high-capacity public transit. Hopefully, that would move us toward reducing congestion.
My answers would be largely the same. And I think the reality of this, that just sometimes we sort of forget the purpose of this. This bridge could fall down any day with a small seismic event. We do not have a choice. We have to replace this bridge. And that's why I've been quite open-minded about the method of doing so in this regard. So the first order of business is to have a bridge that's not going to fall down tomorrow. And so that's got to be the highest priority. I agree that we need to increase the capacity of this bridge, and that's why I believe high-capacity systems are very, very important. As I've said in the past, I thought light rail was the best option personally, but we're going into this with an open mind looking at the data.
Pat, go ahead.
Last question. Quick climate change question. It's unique and special that we have you both here together. So a two-part question. One, a number of big utilities have announced early retirements for the coal plants around the West. So number one, is the era of coal done, and will there be enough electricity when it's gone? And then number two, Governor Brown, we have the short session coming up. Cap and trade is starting to raise its head again. What's your plan for that?
Answer number one to your question is yes, and we're moving forward towards a non-carbonized economy. Number two, I am committed to moving forward on a cap and trade policy in the February legislative session. My goal is to make sure that we have an economy-wide program that sets a data-driven cap, and that we have enforcement tools to stick to that cap. We need to get this done. It needs to be done collaboratively through the legislative process, and I'm working with folks on both sides of the aisle and stakeholders to make sure we can get it across the finish line in February, and delighted, frankly, to have Governor Inslee's support in that effort.
On our side, we're closing our last remaining coal-fired plant, as you know, in the near future. We've also passed a 100% clean electrical grid bill that will give Washingtonians 100% clean electricity in the upcoming decades, with one of the most aggressive, actually, timelines in the nation, and also what we think is the best environmental justice perspective as well. So we'll argue about that between the two governors. But so we've got really good progress in this regard. But we also have, by a rule from our Department of Ecology, actually what you might think of as an economy-wide cap today on CO2 emissions. There was what I would believe was an unfortunate decision by a Superior Court that has put that on hold, and there is now pending decisions in my Supreme Court where if the Supreme Court rules in favor of saving the planet, we will have a cap, and I hope the Supreme Court rules in that regard based on our rule. But we do need further help in our transportation sector to reduce carbon emissions in our transportation sector. That is the real hole in our plan at the moment. And I will be pursuing a clean fuel standard, which has been successful in California and in Oregon and in British Columbia. So we'd like to join for a Pacific Coast to have a clean fuel standard. This has been very effective in these other jurisdictions, and I will be urging my legislators to actually do that. That'll be the missing piece in the puzzle in Washington.
All right, thank you. We're going to
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
legislators and other
Yes.
want to come up for photos?
Are we sitting?
We forgot
All
to
right, we'll
invite
sit.
you all up. Come on up.
Behind the governors on the table.